Welcome to Legislative Update for the Washington State Republican Caucus for the week of January 23rd, 2022. My guest this morning is Senator Mike Padden from Spokane Valley, and nice to see you this morning, Mike.
Nice to see you, Sulani.
My understanding, we're going to focus on the police reform bills that passed last year and the ones that are passing this year to reform the reform. And as I was reading through some preparation material, one of the questions I had is, how were mental health and law enforcement stakeholders involved in last year's bills, and how is your stakeholder group different this year?
Well, I think law enforcement, or at least a lot of law enforcement, felt they could not take somebody who was having a mental health crisis to treatment. They felt that under the laws that were passed last time, in order to detain an individual, that they had to have probable cause that that individual had committed a crime, whereas in the past, the standard has been reasonable suspicion. So we're trying to change that. We're working with law enforcement. We have some wonderful chief of police in Spokane who's worked very closely, Chief Meidel. We've also worked with Sheriff Knesevich, Spokane Valley Police, Liberty Lake Police, and others to try to make some changes here. But these bills and the failure to pass them have had significant consequences. You might remember last year on February 25th, the state Supreme Court came down with the Blake decision, in which the legislature could have easily fixed it, and there were proposals by both Republicans and Democrats to do that by adding the word knowingly in, that somebody to possess felony drugs had to knowingly have them in their possession. And that was the basis of this Blake case, which got overruled by the Supreme Court 5-4 after a Spokane Superior Court judge and the Court of Appeals had ruled that they were guilty. In any event, all we had to do was add knowingly. But instead of doing that, the Democrats, the majority, basically decriminalized the first two possessions of felony drugs. That's meth or heroin, or what is the real scourge right now, fentanyl. And really all they were supposed to do if they saw somebody possessing it is tell them, well, go get treatment. But no follow-up on the treatment, no accountability on the treatment. That's supposed to happen twice, but what if it's a different jurisdiction or a different law enforcement officer? Who's keeping track? None of that was very well defined. And finally, by the third time, maybe a misdemeanor rather than the felony. A felony, you go into the state prison system. A misdemeanor is up to 90 days in jail and a $1,000 fine, and a lot of prosecutors don't even prosecute. My hat's off to Prosecutor Larry Haskell, because he does prosecute them, but still the penalty is so slim, and how do they know it's the third time? So there are consequences of that. I had reports from my constituents, and I confirmed this with Sheriff Knesevich, that out in Newman Lake near the Idaho border, gangs were tagging in rural Newman Lake. Now, there's no major industry out there, anything else. It's mainly a residential community and somewhat of a summer community with some of the cabins on the lake. And the folks out there were very aggressive and cleaning up the graffiti and the tagging. But to think that the gangs have been emboldened by this, they know there's no penalty, and we've seen the crime rates go up, violent crime and drug use all over the area.
Okay, well, I, as you may be aware, I've been involved as a first responder on the other side, and I've watched our own sheriff's department deputies in Lincoln County do a darn good job of de-escalation in some situations where they've come on standby. And I myself was pretty irritated that we weren't able to count on them being able to respond in that standby mode in future. How will some of the bills that have been passed change that for first responders?
Well, they change that burden
if passed, rather,
back to just having a reasonable suspicion. And I think there's a chance that will happen. There's problems with law enforcement being able to pursue somebody they think may have committed a crime if they didn't actually see it. There's all sorts of problems with shoplifting and theft. So it's spread the gamut, and people are upset. It's probably one of the top two issues. If you ask people what they're concerned about, it's kind of inflation and the rise of crime, are the two big issues it appears right now.
Are there a couple of the bills that are proposed? There's quite a long list of solutions to these individual small problems. But are there a couple of bills that you'd like to highlight that will be coming up in the next week or two?
Yeah, we're having a hearing on one bill that Senator Jeff Wilson from Longview is sponsoring. There has been a huge increase in the theft of catalytic converters. And then those are taken to scrap dealers, and money is obtained for drugs and other purposes. So he's got a bill. We'll have a hearing on it. It does account for more accountability for the scrap dealers themselves to make sure that what is being brought into them is not stolen material. We have other legislation. I'm again pushing my DUI legislation, which has been pending for a number of years. It would increase the number of years to 15 from 10 if you had 4 DUIs during that time. The fourth one would be a felony. Working with a Democrat senator where there would be an opportunity for a inpatient treatment, and it could be in prison for 6 months. And some of those things are negotiated in plea bargains anyway, but now this would standardize that. It's a very tough sort of program. And I think in combination with a look back, hopefully that'll be enough to get it to the Democrat House. It's gotten through the Senate the last 3 years.
Okay, so I'm heartened to hear you mention that you're working on that with the Democrat, that there's some bipartisan work going on. How have these bills been crafted with some of those Democrats who now see that there was a problem with the bills they passed last year?
Well, they, of course, are very narrowly crafting their bills. Most of them are starting in the House because they sponsored them, and they've had a lot of pushback from their constituents and from law enforcement. And some of their own police chiefs have spoken out against these, similar to what Chief Meidel has done and Sheriff Knesevich. So ours are more expansive, more broadly, and do more and correct more of the problem, especially in regards to the Blake decision. I would be very surprised if anything actually passes on that. I would hope so. But some of these the pursuit, the situation on mental health issues, some of those issues, I think, have a better chance of making those corrections.
How would you advise constituents who want to follow these bills to have the most impact? Is it leaving voicemails on the legislative hotline? Is it emails to their own representatives or to others?
Well, they are going to have a lot of impact on their own representatives. Most of the people listening to this probably have representatives that want to make these changes and reform. I always feel the more personal the contact, the more impactful. So yeah, leaving a message is good. Emailing is good. If you want to call the legislator's office in Olympia or their district office and leave a personal message with their staff, that's probably even better. And if somehow you could talk to the legislator either over the phone or in person, that's probably the best.
Anecdotes are not a good basis for policy, but they are a good way to illustrate issues. I have some copies of some constituent emails that some information that people have provided. Are there some more anecdotes that you are looking for that would be useful in bringing this to legislators, kind of forcing the conversation?
Well, one of the other areas where there was a mistake is they limited what could be shot out of a 50 caliber shotgun, and that was used for the bean bags to break up demonstrations and de-escalate situations rather than something more lethal than a beanbag. So down in Longview, there was a drug house and the police were up above, but they couldn't use the beanbags because of the legislation. So they had to resort to throwing sticks and stones at the drug house to try to disperse the people inside. I mean, those are some things that we've heard about. There's unfortunately been some tragedies and deaths where law enforcement wasn't able to pursue a crime. Generally, sometimes it's taken more law enforcement personnel to investigate a crime than before. So they may have to send 2 officers out rather than 1 because of some of the laws that were passed. And then some of the Democrats didn't learn from this. I mean, there actually was a proposal that 2 of them sponsored to reduce the penalties for drive-by shootings on the theory that this was racially disproportionate. I mean, it's that type of thinking that I don't think helps anybody of any race. Crime really is not that, the victims of crime are not targeted because of their race. And in fact, some of the, I guess the politically correct term now is marginalized communities are more victims of crime than other folks. So it is a major issue, and there was even some pushback in the municipal elections around the state this last November.
You know, speaking of crime victims, we don't often focus on that side. Are there any proposals that are that you're pushing this year that would benefit crime victims?
Yes, there is a good proposal by Senator Linda Wilson, who's from the Vancouver area, that would allow especially victims of domestic violence to make a witness statement at a gross misdemeanor or misdemeanor level. Right now, they are authorized to make a statement at sentencing, a victim's impact statement, only on felonies. So I think that bill has a good chance of going the distance.
Okay. Coming up on probably at the end of our conversation, I want to leave some time for you to have a few last words. What you'd like to hear, what you hope to see happen this session on these bills.
Well, I certainly want to encourage the public. I want to encourage law enforcement. They do such a wonderful job. I was privileged to walk in the Pacific Northwest March for Life yesterday through downtown Spokane. We had a police escort, some on bicycles, some in cars. They did a fantastic job. They put their lives in harm's way. 99.9% in my mind are very good, decent people that are helping us. And I think these laws, which included put them more at risk for personal lawsuits and all sorts of things, just did not show the proper appreciation. Not that there are not incidents where people make mistakes, and some serious, and they should be held accountable for that. But in general, I think we should be supporting our local law enforcement much more so. Senator Holy has a bill that would increase pay to our local law enforcement and allow grants to go out. So we're trying to do a number of things in this area.
Okay, and I'll close with the last statistic I just had found this morning from a report from the Eatonville Police that Washington currently ranks 50th in the nation for law enforcement officers per capita. So putting more restrictions on their acting within their professional capacity is probably not the way to fix that statistic.
That's for sure. That's for sure.
Well, thank you for joining me this morning, Mike, and I'll look forward to future updates in February.
All right. Sounds good, Sulani. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.